So today we're going to make some variables. We need two. We need a score that goes up whenever the sprites collide, and we also need a timer that goes down every second. We'll start with the score because that's the easier one. So we have the score label here that says 0, but that's not the same as the score variable. So we're going to make a variable, and this is the code we use here. This is initialize global name, and we want our score to start at 0, and we have to name it. We're going to score. Remember, this is just an empty box. The user doesn't see this. Notice that this doesn't go into any event handler. It's its own thing. As soon as the screen loads, it creates this variable and it sets it to 0. And then we can change that variable, or we can change that number, but the score, the box score, is what we're going to code. So we want the score to go up whenever the sprites collide. So we already have an event handler for that. When sprites collide, or when Ghost Sprite collides with the Coin Sprite. So what we want to do is we want to set that variable, set global score to, and then we want it to go up by 1. So we're going to use the +1. So we want the score to say score +1. So global score, set global score to global score +1. So that will make our score go up by 1 whenever the Ghost Sprite collides with the other, which is the Coin Sprite. The tricky part is that this makes the score go up by 1, but it does not change the label. So our variable is changing, but our label stays the same. So we have to tell the label to change as well. So we want the label text, set score label text to, and then we want it to say two things. We want it to say score : and then we want it to get that score that keeps changing. So we need a join here, and that allows us to put two things in here. So the first one's going to be score : space. So that's just the word score with a colon and a space, and then it's going to get the score. So every time the score goes up by 1, it's also going to change the label to reflect that. Okay, without this, the score will go up by 1, but there's no way for the user to see it. So whenever we have a variable that's on our screen, whenever it changes, we have to update the label as well. Like that. Now the timer is going to be a little different because we need an event handler that will go every second. So what we use for that is a clock. So we need to go to our sensors, and we're going to pull over clock, and you can put it anywhere on the screen, and you can see it shows up right here. Clock 1. And now that it's over here, now we can use that when clock 1 timer due. And what this means is what happens every time this clock ticks. Right now we've got it set to, the default is to tick every second. So what do we want to happen every second? Well, we want our timer to go down. So we need to create a timer variable. And I'm going to call it time left. It's going to start at 10 seconds, or 10. And what do we want to happen every time this clock ticks every second? Well, we want this to go down by 1. So just like this score was going up by 1, we want the timer to go, or the time left to go down by 1. So we're going to do the same thing, except set time left to, instead of plus, this time we're going to use minus. So every time the clock ticks, every second, our time left is going to go down by 1. And again, that changes the variable, but you can't see it on the screen until you update the labels. We're going to do the same thing we did here, but with the time label. We're saying timer, colon, space, and then get that number that keeps changing. So now, every second, the clock is going to go down by 1 second, or by 1, and then we'll show it on the screen. The problem is that now it starts at 10, it goes down to 0, but then it keeps going. So we want to make it so that once it gets to 0, it stops. So we need an if then. So we're saying once this variable gets to 0, we want the timer to stop. So if time left, instead of equals, we're going to say less than or equals to. That way it won't go down to negative. So if the time left is less than or equal to 0, then we want to stop this timer, and that code is in the clock, and it is set timer enable to false. So this will stop the clock. So in your start button, you're going to have to set it back to true to start the clock. Actually, we should, when the game starts, we want that timer to be off. So go to your clock, disable the timer, and then in your start button, you're going to have to set it to true. I don't know where my start button went. I've lost my start button. There it is. There we go. So when the start button is clicked, our clock will start ticking. It will go from 10, because that's what it's initialized at, down to 0, and then it will stop. And then in our reset button, we're going to need to reset it back to 10. Yeah. And that's it. The trick is that we don't just change the variable, we also have to reflect that in the labels as well. Okay, both of these. Change the variables and then change the labels.